Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today I'm going to be recapping the third week of the North America League for Rainbow Six Siege, stage number 1 for 2024. 10 games to go over, so let's just get into it. Los versus Space Station is game number 1. I didn't predict this one correctly. I don't think a ton of people did. Maybe some people saw the upset potential that Los seemed to be mounting, and finally they unleashed it here. They looked pretty reasonable in pretty much all of their games up to this point, but Space Station had been pretty solid. It was pretty hard to bet against them here, and it did end up being a close game, but still Los took all 3 points. They play on Clubhouse, which is sort of a famous map for SSG, but that's pretty long removed. Not much left standing from those days. J90 and Ashen continue to be the shining stars on Space Station, especially Ashen. Obviously, J90 slightly higher rating here, but Ashen outfragged him 3 and 2 on entry, getting into a ton of those engagements. Everyone else on Space Station really struggling, particularly Fultz, 0 and 4 on entry, 4 and 10 on KD. Both stats are pretty brutal, and I think Fultz has definitely been better than Iconic and Forest after this week is concluded, so up to this point in the stage. But this was a pretty bad game for him. Boreas and Sexy Cake really popping off. Sexy Cake also had a very good game on this map against, I want to say Dark Zero, don't quote me on that. I think that was the team they played on Clubhouse, but plus 3-0 on entry, really good stuff. Boreas also 1vx clutch and 1 from Bursa as well to secure a couple of rounds. If either of these had gone the other way, this would have gone to overtime. And Rise, the only player really struggling here. And let's move on to game number 2. Dark Zero versus M80. This one was, certainly not 50-50. Dark Zero has looked much worse than M80 coming into the stage. It felt like Dark Zero, maybe this was the day for them to bounce back. Maybe it wasn't against M80, maybe it was against Luminosity, and we'll see that in a little bit. But I think I did go M80, so I got this one correct. It didn't seem super hard, but I think it would have been, it didn't feel unreasonable to pick Dark Zero at the time. And it still ended up being pretty close. We play on Skyscraper, very defender-sided map, and this could have been very different had it not been for a few clutches from Noodle. He got 2, I want to say these were at least 1v2 or 1v3 clutches, and they were like post plants on defense. He really popped off, showed up big for his team. His stats still aren't spectacular for the stage overall. I think he's still negative, like -1 on kills and entry or something, but being that impactful in rounds in a game where it might have gone to overtime, you might have even lost otherwise, who knows. But big stuff from him regardless. 12 and 4 even without the clutches is impressive. However, he got the kills. Spoit did quite well. I think he was turning it up early on in the game. Same thing against Luminosity, and then he fell off a little bit, but Noodle picked it up where he left off. Citizen, solid game overall. Kino did fine. Cameraman struggling a little bit, but his teammates certainly picked up the slack. NJR finally doing well. I think in the last 3 games, and that's this game, and then also some games we're gonna see in a little bit. He's been, I want to say, their top-rated player in all of them, if not 2 out of 3. But he's making a comeback, but his team isn't quite with him. Canadian is having a brutal stage this game, really reflecting that. Bolo was having a pretty reasonable stage, but he's really starting to fall off statistically, which we'll also continue to see. Nate's been pretty solid overall, though. And Pambazoo, I think probably we'll want to see a little bit more from Pambazoo as their main entry. And move on to game number 3 here. We have Luminosity versus Oxygen. And Luminosity, they got a couple of wins, but Oxygen, they've got everyone. If you predicted Oxygen every time, you got that prediction right every time. And I think actually I have. And it hasn't felt too hard to predict Oxygen because of the teams that they played against and the time that they played them and all these things. But, Oxygen predictions have paid dividends, certainly. This did end up being pretty close. It looked like it could have been a runaway. I want to say Oxygen went up. Yeah, they got the first 4 rounds in a row, and they even made it a 5-1 half, and then they got up all the way onto match point. They're up 6-1, but then Luminosity got 1 round, 2 round, 3 rounds, 4 rounds, but they were not able to get that 5th round in a row to push it to overtime, so the full 3 points for Oxygen, and they've still yet to drop a point, so really good stuff from them. Everyone sort of popping off here besides Yaga, and Newers being the standout player for the team in this game, and for the stage overall. He's been really, really good. And not anything too terribly impressive on Luminosity. Silent, I think he's had some reasonable games so far, but -4 on the entry is pretty brutal, as we've already seen more than once, I think, today. So yeah, that'll do it for this one. Let's move on to the next game. What are we on? Number 4, Beast Coast versus Sonics. And sort of like Los, Beast Coast finally getting a win, and it didn't feel like they would do so. I think maybe the Los one felt a little bit more reasonable based on Los' performance. And I mean, maybe this one felt sort of reasonable based on Sonic's slightly shaky performance. I think they were doing all right up to this point, and this is where they've sort of started to fall off a cliff. But Beast Coast, I don't think anybody expected them to win this dominantly, even if some people thought maybe they could win. Yeah, Beast Coast finally showing their potential. They go up. They go up 6-0, right? Am I remembering this right? Yeah, they get all 6 rounds on defense. I do wonder if this had to do with the map. Maybe Sonics really weren't ready for Nighthaven, and because Nighthaven, I don't think up to this point it hadn't been played in Brazil or Europe or North America. And I think still it hasn't been played in Europe or Brazil. I'm not 100% sure. This was certainly the only play in North America, and again, it hadn't been played up to this point in any of the big regions. So a big surprise pick. It's not like we've not seen it at all since it's been in the pool, but it's been basically non-existent this stage, again, in the big regions. Sonics sort of battling back a little bit. They do get a full rotation, so if they'd been able to do that a second time, they could have pushed overtime, but no, Beast Coast finally secure it. It was getting just a little bit scary, but they still had several rounds to work with. There was a very funny timeout called in this match. Yeah, I was laughing on that one. And yeah, I guess I probably should have plugged it before this point, but if you're still listening, maybe you're somebody that would be more interested. I've been streaming on Twitch usually once a week. Yeah, exactly once a week for the last 2 weeks. I intend to do so probably on Thursday for NAL. I know there's also, I guess, Friday and Saturday games. Maybe I'll do some number of those. Maybe, but probably I'll be doing at least 4 of the games on Thursday. That's what I've been doing. The days have been running a little bit long, so I've been retiring before the final game. But anyways, swing by, check it out. It's usually me and one or more people having a good time watching some Siege, chatting, whatever. And also on Tuesday, I think I'm planning to record another podcast style video with the guys talking about EU and NA, what we've seen so far, and maybe our predictions for the rest of the stage. I don't think that'll probably the video will be out Wednesday, so be on the lookout for that. In this game, yeah, Hot and Cold doing excellently, but Gaveni, Spirits, even Diffuser doing pretty well. Gunner, the only player with unimpressive stats, but they get the full 3 points. It's whatever. Merc and Rexon, I suppose, doing fine. Geo really on the struggle bus for this game, 2 and 9s. Kind of tough. Sonics looked pretty reasonable on the entry. They went +2 overall, so solid there, but they just weren't able to convert that into enough rounds to close out the game. And then we'll move on to the final game of the first day. Of course, we have 2 days to talk about. Dark Zero versus Luminosity, and this is that bounce back I was talking about. I didn't fully expect Dark Zero to win against M80. Of course, I predicted M80 to win. I did predict Dark Zero to win here. I didn't think it would quite be a 7-2. We haven't seen too many super dominant games this stage. The previous game, it could have been a lot more dominant, could have ended up being a 7-0, but it was still a 7-3. Dark Zero got 7-2'd themselves by Sonics, right? And now we see another 7-2. We have at least one more dominant game coming up in the following day. But yeah, Luminosity fall apart a little bit. Dark Zero, just based on, community sentiments based on the team and what we've seen, whatever, it feels like the type of team that would dismantle the type of team that Luminosity is, but Luminosity having a slightly better stage up to this point maybe than people were expecting. Dark Zero having a much worse stage than people were expecting for them. They play on Chalet, and it's another great game for NJR, a 12-4 coming out for him, and Nafe, Bolo, Panba, all doing pretty well, anywhere from pretty well to fine. Canadian, the lowest rated player once again, but oh well, you get easy 3 points here. Kickstro doing well, but everybody else getting sort of brutalized. Eddie almost 0-8, but he does manage to get that one frag in their Wi-Fi 0-3 on the entry. Is a little bit tough, and we will move on to the second day's game. So we have M80 versus Space Station. This one felt like a complete coin flip. I mentioned that, and my predictions for this day were really bad, unfortunately. And I mean, I feel a little bit bad. I certainly wish I'd got more of them correct, but it did feel like several of the games, I said it when I was talking about the day, that I felt like this was the hardest day to call so far. And this ended up being close. It was a 7-5 victory, and it came down to really small things. I felt like, small mistakes M80 made were capitalized on by SSG, and vice versa. I guess maybe SSG made a few more mistakes than M80, and that resulted in the 7-5 victory for M80, full 3 points for them. Good for them. They're having a good stage, topped only by Oxygen. Likely it'll come down to the matchup between those two teams to determine who will be first place, but as of now, I guess Oxygen, I think, is 4 points ahead of M80, so we'll see what happens. Play on Consulate. Haven't seen a ton of Consulate this stage so far. Citizen pops off. Spoit made the massive play in the final round, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you can't quite tell from the replay or the live game. I don't think the replays are out, I don't believe. In the very final round, it's somebody on Castle, I think it's Cameraman here. He locks Spoit into that back hallway in the basement after SSG have taken some map control, but they haven't pushed in there yet. So I believe he locks him in there. Certainly Spoit's in there, but I'm not 100% sure he castles him in there. You hear the sound, but you don't see him actually do it, but I'm pretty sure that's where he is. And then SSG, they take into that room, the server room, and they push on forward, and as they're executing, it looks like Space Station's gonna win, but Spoit being locked in there is really the X factor. Because had they not locked him in there, of course, that requires him to make the sound, to pull down the door, to take the time to do that, all that stuff. But you don't expect him to be in there. Like, you don't check it, right? It's up. You're like, okay, there's no reason anyone would be in there. Let's not waste time droning it. And so they don't even think about it. And I think it's Ashen gets several big kills, but then Spoit hits him from the back and closes out the round, closes out the game. Also, huge play in round number, I think it was the very first round, or first round, second round, third round, one of the earlier rounds in the game, if not the first round. Kino made that play with the Amaru. Go back and watch that one for sure, where it comes down to a 1v1, him versus J90. J90 has like 2 seconds left. He's disabling the diffuser, and Kino on Amaru comes in, swings in, gets the Amaru animation kill. It was crazy to watch, and J90, I think maybe like a second left on the disable. Had he not been Amaru, that wouldn't have worked out. He didn't have time to rappel up and shoot him, I don't think. And again, J90, Ashen, the 2 stars. Fult's doing a little bit better, but again, Forest and Iconic, yet another brutal game. They really need to shore up their performances, because the hero plays of these 2 players have proven to not be enough anymore. Maybe they were in the first 3 games, but not in the subsequent games. Moving on, we have Los versus Wildcard. Another, I don't know, it didn't feel super 50-50. It felt like Los finally found their footing and that they were sort of the favorites. Wildcard had a win under their belts, but it was that very unimpressive win against Beast Coast. And so, yeah, it felt like Los was probably the better team. I don't know, we've seen a little bit less from Los or a little bit more from Wildcard up to this point, then I think it would have felt maybe dead on 50-50. And I wanted to go Wildcard here, I really did. I felt like I was buying into the Los hype just a little bit too much, and I paid for it. I did predict Los, which again, I felt like was sort of the favorite coming into it, not massively, but reasonably. But no, Wildcard do secure the game. Finally, they get a decent amount of points. They only had, what, like 2 points, or, they had a few points coming into this game, but not many. 3 more for them. They played on Oregon, and it was a good game from Rampy. Finally, he had the first half of like the first game he played was pretty good, and then he fell off, and he never really recovered for the next few games. But finally, we see a solid one from him here. Another great game from Kansan. We've seen several from him. He's been anywhere from mediocre to excellent in like every game he's played. I don't think he's had a bad game yet. Vertical, Spiker also showing up. Needed to see that. Bosco, this is what you want to see as like the main support player on the team. You'd like to see him on the bottom, but he didn't do too badly. minus 1.99 rating. Pretty reasonable. Finally, the wild card, I think a lot of people expected showing up. Let's see if it's too late or not. Moving on, we have the, what is this? The 8th game, ninth game, I think? No, 8th game, right. Beast Coast versus Dark Zero. This is another one that I felt was pretty 50-50. Both of these teams hadn't been doing so well this stage, but finally they showed up and had a solid win in their most recent game. Beast Coast over Sonics, Dark Zero over Luminosity. And the maybe you think Sonics was a more impressive win, but Dark Zero's scoreline was slightly more dominant, the 7-2 versus the 7-3 in Beast Coast game. So I went Dark Zero. I felt like maybe they'd finally recovered enough to get the wins. I certainly didn't think they were getting demolished like this, but no, I mean, Beast Coast just looked really good after looking really bad for the first 3 games. And Bolo with the 0 rating. I don't know if we've ever seen this in NAL. I've definitely seen this once or twice in like APAC leagues, in smaller leagues outside of the big 3 regions, but yeah, I don't know if I've seen this in NA or Europe or Brazil before. 0-8, no untree engagement, 0% cost, zeros across the board everywhere, responsible for the 0%. Had he was never even traded, right? That would have made his cost non-zero, and he would have had at least a little bit of rating, but no, everything. He contributed nothing. Of course, he probably made a few calls, or like they got a little bit of info off his death, so not stone cold nothing, but as far as you can track in the stats, he did nothing, right? Canadian also, another bad game. Nafe and Pamazoo are reasonable. NJR, once again, the top player on the team, but not nearly enough to not get demolished. Spirit's actually the worst player on Beast Coast, still doing reasonably though. He's been certainly their best player, I think, this stage up to this point on average, but Gaveni, Diffuser, Hot and Cold, Gunner, all sort of popping off, and good for Beast Coast. I'm glad to see this from him. And then we have Oxygen versus Sonics. This is another one that I don't think it was like 50-50 by any means. I could have seen Sonics bounce back here. Maybe you thought that the Beast Coast game really was a fluke as a result of the map that they were playing on. Like, don't go back to Nighthaven Labs, you weren't ready for that. But Oxygen, they, again, were impeccable up to this point. It did feel like this was the first sort of top team that they were going to play. Of course, Sonics didn't look like a top team in their last game, but, coming into the stage, they were expected to be one of the top teams. Oxygen show up 7-3, didn't really break a sweat. It's not like this was a 7-5 or something where it was terribly close. They handled them pretty easily on another Chalet map. And Newer's on top once again. This guy's been going crazy. He might have had no bad games at all. He's done at least reasonably every game. He might have done well every game. Ashen had done that as well. He was really good every game up until his last game or two where he was okay. I don't think he's had a terrible game just yet, but Newer's, I think if the stage ended right here, you would probably name him MVP. We'll see if he can keep it up. Gomez doing pretty well. Dream, a good game. Yaga, Diaz, also pretty reasonable. Adam did fine, but Geo and Merc, the two former TSM players, the worst players on Sonics. I don't know who you blame necessarily here. I think it was just a team thing. The 0-4, we've seen a lot of these today, but the 0-4 entry on Ambi is pretty brutal. I guess he got a reasonable number of kills, but yeah, I don't think it's like I don't think you can just point at anybody on Sonics and say it's their fault. It feels like as a team that they're just not all the way there, and I don't think that's too terrible. We'll see if they can make it into the top 6. That seems entirely possible. Do keep in mind that this is a pretty new roster. Ambi, he played SI with the team, but he's still very new, and then Adam and Merc are brand new to the team, so give them a little bit of time. I'm sure they'll recover at some point. And then we have Space Station versus Wildcard, the final game. And I think the biggest blowout of the stage, the first 7-1, and I think we've seen no 7-0s, right? So Wildcard, they destroy him. This is a game we were supposed to see on that very first day, but it got postponed because all the games on that day got postponed. We see Rampy and Bosco up against Fultz and their old org, and they take their revenge here. It's an Oregon game, and it is not close, as we've gone over. Everybody thought Space Station would win. Yeah, Wildcard did get a win recently. Maybe Space Station weren't looking great, but still, I think pretty much everybody thought Space Station. This isn't one of those games today that I considered flip-flopping. Several of them I did, but not really this one, so I was surprised. Everybody gets smoked on Space Station. Nobody gets more than 5 kills. I guess nobody gets fewer than 3 kills, but everybody on Wildcard doing reasonably to very well, with Bosco, Kansan, and Spiker all popping off. Spiker only dying twice, funny enough. Bosco dying 5 times, but going 12-5. Bosco and Kansan have certainly been the two standout players on this team for this stage, and the other players have had a few standout moments, but no, it's certainly been these two have been the MVPs thus far, especially Kansan, and maybe Bosco a little bit quieter, but of course he's on sort of quieter roles, so that does make sense. I'm really glad to see him not floundering in his return. And okay, with all of that being looked at, let's take a quick look at the stats, and then we'll see the standings. So here are the leaderboards. We see Newer's on top in terms of rating and KD. Gomez topping the entry, tied with several players. Spoit on top of Cost, also tied with Dream. So we see a bunch of Oxygen players on top. It makes sense. They have 15 out of 15 points. They've not even gone to overtime or anything. Noodle and Wi-Fi, and actually Canadian, strangely enough, with the most clutches. And Dream is the top planting. So yeah, we have an Oxygen player on top or tied for first place in all of the categories except for clutches. If Newer's had just one more clutch, then he'd be tied up there. And I guess we'll just look at I like looking at it this way, grouping by the teams. Eddie not having a great stage. He is their hard support player now. It sort of makes sense that he has the worst stats, and maybe especially bad stats, considering he's sort of been slotted into this role recently. I definitely want to see better from him in the future, but you can maybe excuse his performance. Again, playing on a hard role on a quote-unquote weaker team. We'll see if they can bounce back at all, but doesn't seem super likely at this point. Geo, the hard support player on Sonics, not doing super well. Ambi on top, Merc also doing reasonably. These are the two main fraggers for the team. Rexon recently switched over to playing Breach, and he's going -10. I guess could be worse. On Beast Coast, like I mentioned, Spirit's the best player on the team on average, only going +4, +0, but he has, he has a big 1vx. He has a few plants to his name, so those stats bring him up, as well as the cost being solid on him. And then Gaveni doing well as well. Hot and Cold, the main support on the team, is actually dead in the middle of the team. That's impressive to see. Diffuser in his debut stage, not doing super well, not doing terribly. Certainly more time for him to evolve. And Gunner not doing super well. He's traditionally been that sort of player where he does pretty well or pretty poorly. I guess pretty poorly at this stage. Let's see if he improves. On Los, they're relatively tightly clustered. Legacy actually the only player going positive. Sexy Cake, despite having a few really good games, has also had some pretty bad games to put him pretty low on the rate. Well, a little bit low on the rating, but still +5 on entry is at least impressive. Rise, was doing okay, but he had one bad game that really brought him down in this last week. And I think pretty much everybody on Los has had at least one pop-off game. I guess I didn't really point it out, but I think when they lost to Wildcard, Rise was the only player that did reasonably well. Did I? Maybe I might have actually forgot to look at the numbers for that one. Oh well, if I did, feel free to go back and look at it. It's on CGG, but he was the only one really fighting back. He had one really impressive clutch and one round where I think he got like a 4K, but I think they might have ended up losing that. I don't remember. Maybe not. On M80, Spoit has been the star of the show. Spoit back to the form that I think people expected from Spoit all along. And Noodle was their worst player coming into the week, but now he's tied in second place with Citizen. Here's that -1/-1 I was referring to, but his 3-1 VXs are integral in his rating being this high. Also has a few plants and a few disables. Kino doing very well for himself after having not so great, maybe year, but in the support role on this team, he's doing pretty well. +3, 7 plants, good stuff. Cameraman, the lowest player, but my understanding is that he's the primary IGL, and so that can always hurt your stats a little bit if you have to focus on calling rather than your individual playing at times. But still, -5, -1, it's pretty reasonable. Here is Newers going insane, +27, only +2 on the entry, not spectacular, but the +27 is certainly the stat to look at. Great cost, phenomenal KPR. He's been the top rated player on the team in most of their games, not all of them. There's been at least like one DS topping game and whatnot, but just great stuff from him. Really good stuff also from Gomez and Diaz, the two new players on the team. Dream and Yaga not doing as well, but everybody having a positive rating is a positive thing to see. On Dark Zero, Nafe is the top player, even though NJR was the top player for the last week by far. He had enough bad games at the beginning to not allow him to take that top spot. Pambazoo and Bolo, the two main fraggers on the team, not doing so well. You really don't like to see this. Pamba, I guess, good on the entry, but overall they're -11, even on entry. And Canadian having a brutal stage, 26 and 48 is obviously really bad. And he still is getting into a ton of those entry engagements, more than Bolo, more than Pamba, more than anyone else on the team. And I realize that a lot of those are on defense, so calling those entries is a little bit disingenuous. I really wish they were split on CGG. You could see their attack entry stats and their defense, quote unquote entry stats. It is the entry engagement, but I hope you understand what I'm saying, that it's a little bit different when you're a defender versus an attacker. On Wildcard, yeah, Kansan going insane. Again, I don't know if he's had a bad game. He's had a few lukewarm games, but also some really, really good games. One amazing game, I think the best game this stage of anybody. It did go all 15 rounds. That enables you to get a lot more kills. He went like 24 and 10, I think. +14 is phenomenal. Bosco doing really, really well. I do always love to see support players getting into very few entry engagements, and he did the fewest on the team, but he's also +4, tied with Kansan, tied for the top entry on the team. Vertical getting into by far the most, which is intentional. He isn't positive by any means, but still getting into a lot of those entries and winning half of them. I mean, the team overall is doing really well on entries. They are +9, so even if your main entry isn't going super positive, the team is overall. So I think that's just a good look. And then Ashen, the star of the show on Space Station, a ton of entry engagements. Also a lot on Forest. He's done this historically, gets into a lot of entry engagements as a more support-oriented player, but it hasn't worked out well for him. It has in the past, but not here. 6 and 12 is pretty tough. Maybe he needs to sit back just a little bit more, maybe let J9O or somebody else take a bit more of those entries, because he has not been winning a lot of his fights. And like I said, yeah, Iconic and Forest, the two players that I'd really like to see step up on SSG, because Folt he's been decent, and again, J9O and Ashen have been pretty phenomenal statistically overall. And finally, let's go to the standings. So yeah, Oxygen, the full 15 points. They are the only team guaranteed top 6 at this point. M80 pretty overwhelmingly likely, but they're not guaranteed just yet. And the teams have played a variable number of games, like Space Station have played 6, Sonics have played 6, Dark Zero have played 6, but like Luminosity and Oxygen and M80, they've only played 5. So some teams have 2 games left to play, which are the teams that have already played 6. Some teams have 3 games left to play, which are the teams that have only played 5. So yeah, Oxygen looking phenomenal. They've only played 5 and they have by far the most points. Los, they might have the fewest points, but they have more games to play than, again, Sonic, Space Station, Dark Zero. And let's just look at, I want to see where the Oxygen M80 game is. Is that on the very final day? It is. So it could be up to that point when we see who is going to take that top spot. But if Oxygen don't drop any points up to that point, you know, it'll be moot, because even if M80 gets the full 3 points on them, it won't matter. Oxygen has a current 4-point lead, so they'll have to give up points before that point for it to matter. But it could be, at the very least, an exciting game to you know, see the head-to-head, if nothing else. Wildcard snuck all the way from last place into 3rd place, and they needed a lot of things to go right, because not only did they need to get their full 6 points, but they needed like Space Station to not get any more points. They needed several teams to not do badly, and some teams to do okay, but not super well, to pass them, but yeah, to pass them and, you know, allow that to happen. Los fell back into last place. They were in like 7th or 8th. So we've seen a little bit of downwards mobility. All of the upwards mobility almost hogged by Wildcard, because again, they got +6 positions, but like Dark Zero went down by like 1, Luminosity went down 1 or 2. You know, pretty much everybody went down. I think maybe Beast Coast went up 1 or 2, and everybody else, again, besides Wildcard, went up. Or sorry, went down, besides the top 2 positions, didn't actually change. M80 and Space Station were tied, but I guess by some factor, M80 had the tiebreaker. They were in 2nd, Space Station was in 3rd. And I think that's gonna do it. I don't think I really need to talk about anything else. This video is plenty long. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns about any of the stuff I discussed. Did I make any errors? Did I neglect to talk about something you would have liked to have heard me talk about? And again, that podcast video should hopefully be coming out Wednesday. Probably this video should be going up on Monday, which I guess is also when I'm recording it. But anyways, I guess that's gonna do it for me. I will catch you guys next time.